Welcome back to another episode of ADAC Answers. Today we have Vice President of Educational Partnerships at ADAC, Matt Moloney. Hey, Matt, thanks so much for being on our show today and for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your journey and expertise with us.
Thanks so much, Aaron. It's great to be here.
We'll jump right in. If you just want to briefly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your role as Vice President of Educational Partnerships, what brought you to ADAC, and your journey over the last 15 years in education.
Absolutely. I have spent the last 15 plus years in education, specifically Catholic education, as a teacher, leader, vice principal, and principal. I've worked at both the high school and the K-8 level. And my journey started as a teacher with the Alliance for Catholic Education, a program to the University of Notre Dame, and continued through that and through my leadership journey as both a vice principal and principal. My last principal role was at a K-8 Catholic school in Florida.
Awesome. Thank you. What inspires you to pursue a career in education and take on leadership roles throughout your educational journey?
Well, growing up, education was always a big part of my life and my family's. My mom and my dad were both educators out of college. My dad eventually had a career change, but my mom was a career educator and eventually went back to school, got her master's in special education and was a special educator. So it was a little bit in the blood, and I may have resisted it at first, but eventually I came to my senses that education was my calling. And it was interesting because my own career as a student was not always the easiest one, especially when I was younger. I struggled with reading. I was able to compensate quite a bit through other coping mechanisms, being a good listener in class, working hard, etc., having older siblings I could lean on. But I always struggled with reading, and it didn't become pronounced until I was almost in middle school. And by all accounts, I would probably be considered someone who maybe would have been receiving pullout or some type of other interventions in school
Hmm.
that didn't really exist as much in the early 90s. And so I really have a passion for that, especially for students with diverse learning needs.
Definitely. I can totally relate to that. Being an undiagnosed kid with dyslexia and ADHD in the classroom, not knowing why I just couldn't find the right answer like everyone else could. I also felt the same way about school. I was like, there's like a negative feeling. It was very difficult. It was challenging. It was frustrating. And I really didn't want to go back to that. And my mentor who brought me into teaching was like, you were made to be a teacher. And I was like, I don't even like kids. So I don't know why I would be a teacher. And then he said, just shadow the kindergarten class for a week and see if you're interested in the opportunity. And after the first day, I fell in love and I was like, all right, you're right. So I
Absolutely.
definitely ran
And it,
away
and
from
it's
it.
it's mentors and models as well. It was my parents. It was I don't want to see other students have the same reading struggles that I did, but
Exactly.
also I had some amazing teachers and mentors throughout my journey that just reinforced that kind of a career in service, so to speak.
Definitely.
Some of those teachers were at the grade school level. I joke that I can name all of my teachers from kindergarten through eighth grade. And then I had some really impactful high school teachers that really inspired me through their leadership and mentorship to want to pursue a career in education as well.
Awesome. Your academic journey includes programs at two incredible institutions. How have these shaped your perspective on education and leadership?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate at St. Anselm College, which is a Benedictine Catholic college in Manchester, New Hampshire. I actually studied philosophy during my time there. I was not an undergraduate major in education who knew it all the way. I actually was an undeclared major until the absolute last moment they would let me stay undeclared. So I was just going through the college buffet of trying a little bit of everything, and I took philosophy, which was pretty ironic for someone who struggled with reading, picked a pretty reading intensive
Yeah.
major in college. But it was just always fascinating and with just such a thought process, whether that be with Socratics or into the medieval philosophers and whatnot. I just found it very interesting. And I think it really prepared me as I went into graduate school at Notre Dame through the Alliance for Catholic Education
Shout
and
out.
then started, shout out is right, uh, through and then pursue leadership because I really feel leadership is as much a philosophy
Mhm.
and a mindset as it is skills. So I really think that prepared me really well to be mission focused,
Mhm.
understanding what's the why or what's the underlying mission behind what you're trying to accomplish as a school, as an organization, whatever it may be. And it really allowed me to have that focus and in as I moved into leadership roles.
I totally agree. The knowledge I gained through my programs at Notre Dame just really set me on a completely different path of how I think about leadership versus administration and just really focusing on school culture and being intentional about all things that you do. In your role as Vice President of Educational Partnerships, what are your primary responsibilities and how do you foster collaboration between educational institutions?
I started this role just a couple months ago in July, and it's been amazing getting to work with our whole team at ADAC. And I had a previous working relationship with our president, Steve Perla. And really, I'm charged with fostering relationships and building partnerships with educational institutions all over the country, whether that be dioceses of Catholic schools, other private schools or private school networks, or other organizations that share in our work and share in our mission, and see how our services and their needs might meet and where we can provide some services and supports, especially in the areas of, our advocacy work in
Mhm.
IDEA, but then also professional development for teachers and leaders. So really cultivating relationships in the educational field to see how ADAC can broaden its impact as we try to fulfill our mission.
Drawing from your experience in private education, how have you cultivated a positive and inclusive school culture in your various roles?
I think culture is at the heart of every school and organization, and every school has a culture. It's just a matter of whether it's defined
Mhm.
intentionally and precisely, and whether the school leadership and teachers are driving the culture or if they're letting some other source drive that culture.
Mhm.
And so I actually recently did a professional development on school culture for one of our partner schools in Dyersville, Iowa, Archbishop Beckman High School, and had a great time meeting their faculty and staff and working together with them to really hone in on evaluating their mission, defining the underlying beliefs that make that mission possible, and then articulating values that can then be shared with stakeholders in order to continue to fulfill that mission. And I think the culture really informs everything that you do,
Mhm.
and it informs all of your policies. Whenever I started at a new school or whenever I'm working with a new school, I always love to ask why questions. And when I became principal of my last school, I would say, "Oh, why do we do grading in this way?"
Mhm.
Or "Why is our dress code policy X, Y, or Z?" Or and sometimes you get the answer of because
We've always
and
done
it
it
gives
that
you
way.
because either we've always done it that way, which isn't an answer,
Right.
which it's an answer, it's not a reason. And or there is a very good reason behind it, or there's a good genesis behind it, or maybe that reason was from 10 years ago and isn't as
Mhm.
valid as it is today. It's also having a perspective of constantly being reflective.
Mhm.
I like to say reflective rather than evaluative.
Mhm.
So you're just constantly reflecting on your practices, your policies, your procedures in order to then look back and say, does this align with what we say we believe about students learning, about behavior, about our school or our organization's mission? And it really allows you to be focused, and it actually allows for better decision making
Mhm.
and easier decision making when you're faced as a leader with difficult decisions on a daily, weekly, monthly
Yes.
basis. If you can stay mission focused and go back to your beliefs and values as an institution,
Mhm.
usually the answer is pretty obvious. And from a leadership standpoint, whether that be a principal or assistant principal, oftentimes when you're rolling out a new initiative or trying to institute some type of change within your school, buy-in from your faculty and staff may or may not be difficult depending on what is being changed. Is it
Yes.
a long-standing tradition, something else? And if you can stay mission focused, it allows for more people to get on the bandwagon, be compliant, and for there to be less resistance to change if you can eloquently and intentionally articulate what the reasoning behind that change is. Usually there's better compliance.
Definitely. The concept of inclusive education is gaining momentum. How do you ensure that Catholic schools or private schools in general remain inclusive and diverse in their student body and staff?
Again, I think this goes back to mainly goes back to mission, and start with Catholic schools, but really any faith-based school, we need to look at the dignity of every human being and every student.
Mhm.
And so everyone deserves an excellent education. And that's what we strive to give them. From a practical standpoint, too, private schools are tuition based.
Mhm.
And there's more and more competition out there than ever before in the field of education. There's charter schools, there's magnet schools, there's your local public schools, there's a variety of whether they be independent, faith based, non sectarian,
Mhm.
parochial, private schools. And now there's even more momentum with school choice. So parents, regardless of income, are more and more having the ability to be selective customers of their child's education.
Mhm.
And one, it's just from that standpoint, when you're a private school that's tuition driven, it's just good business practice to make sure that you can that you can offer an education to as many students as possible.
Mhm.
But more important than that is that it's the goal of every school should be to serve as many students as possible and offer them an excellent education. And so I think that school choice and inclusion really go hand in hand really well, because every school is unique and every child is unique.
Mhm.
Allowing parents to be able to choose for their children the school that's the best fit for them and will best serve them
Mhm.
is what we all hope and dream for our own children. And we want everything to be a good match.
Yes, definitely. I totally agree. And with inclusion, I'm a huge supporter of fully inclusive classrooms and push in systems. And when I was looking for a school, because the public school was not really serving me, I was called stupid, lazy, dumb by my third grade teacher. And when we looked for Catholic schools, they said that they didn't take kids like me. And so then I had to go to CCD classes in addition to going to school where I was already struggling. And being a teacher in Catholic schools, I saw that we were definitely more inclusive than when I was trying to go to Catholic elementary school, but there's still a lot of schools that don't feel like they have the necessary knowledge or training to be able to serve all these students. And that's why I love doing this work so much, because it really is going to continue that trend upwards towards supporting students with special needs.
That's 100%. I agree. But also, a lot of the history of Catholic education was about serving the underserved and serving those on the margins. And it started when those schools were founded on the East Coast, and a lot of them were serving immigrant communities.
Mhm.
And schools need to get back to their calling and to their mission of being open and serving all, not just serving those who check certain boxes.
I totally agree. Private schools often have unique missions. How do you ensure that the values and missions of a private school are woven into the fabric of its culture?
Yep, we talked a little bit about this, about the importance of it, but I really think that has to take it just has to be an intentional and prioritized part of a school's leadership and staff by first by articulating that mission, those values, those beliefs. It begins there because otherwise, if you're making decisions outside of the scope of your mission, or it might be some things that are just unintentional. So it might be that dress code is such a battle. And you know what? Let's pick our battles and we're not going to be as strict with this. If you're not going to sweat the small stuff when it comes to that, why should the expectations be to sweat the small stuff or that the small things matter when it comes to other things like being on time, acknowledging deadlines, making sure things are done like that?
You need like
It's uh,
consistency in communication and in all messaging.
exactly. That's exactly right. It's a matter of you got to walk the walk. And I think of a quote by Sister Helen Prejean, and she one time said that watch what I do to see what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just so powerful. It goes back to actions speak louder than words.
Right.
So I think you have to articulate it. And I think it has to be a consistent messaging. Absolutely. And so the words do matter,
Hmm.
but you have to back that up with actions that represent what you believe in.
Yes, definitely. That is so important.
And that's one of the greatest challenges for school leaders now. There's so much on their plate, and it's deciphering through. There's the administrative pieces that you have to do. There's day to day. There's putting out the fires. There's instructional leadership within the building, but you have to look at your organization from a 30,000 foot view as well and make sure how are all the pieces working together. So it seems like year in and year out, there's more and more expected or more and more put on the plate
Mhm.
of leaders and educators. And so kudos to everyone who's continuing in the field at any level, but especially big thanks to principals, assistant principals, teachers out there
Yes.
doing all the hard work on the ground every day, changing lives and inspiring students and families.
Yes, I totally agree. When I was in grad school, we went on a trip to go visit a couple of schools, and there's one in Washington. It was a high school, and everyone just loved their job. You could feel it. No one had to say it. Everyone was happy. Students were happy, and we got to talk to the president and principal, and they focused on being mission driven, making sure that they could back up all of their rationales to the mission that was driving every single one of their decisions, but they focused on school culture. What was going to make people want to come through the door every day? What is going to make this community different? And they went from having trouble for enrollment issues to having a multiple year wait list because everyone wants to join in on this now. These are our values, these are our beliefs, this is what we're rooted in.
Exactly. And being then your decision making is consistent.
Mhm.
Teachers feel there's such a trickle down effect, like
Yes,
you were talking about, that goes to a waiting list. And I would be willing to guess that they don't have as much teacher turnover as they used to,
correct.
because even though they may have even higher expectations now of their teachers than they did prior,
Mhm.
it's consistent. They know what they're expected. They know what's expected of them. They know they're being supported.
Mhm.
And in a time when there's such a teacher shortage, having a clear culture and having a school that your faculty and staff want to come to each day
Yes.
is so huge. It's so huge. There's schools, the school year is beginning. Many schools, many school districts, school networks, dioceses that are understaffed and starting with subs in the classrooms,
Right.
or administrators having to be in the classroom because they don't have enough staffing. So it has a trickle down effect in every aspect of running the school.
Mhm. And just there's so many benefits that come from it. It's something that if it's not on your radar to focus on or to evaluate, then leaders, it should definitely be on your list because it really does impact the entire community and benefit everyone.
Yeah.
Um,
If any of our listeners out there are interested in reading more, I'd really recommend the book On Purpose by Samuel Casey Carter. It really summarizes and gives some great examples of school culture and the impact it has on building great schools and especially forming student character. On Purpose is a phenomenal resource.
Great. Thank you for the recommendation. How would you measure the success of a private school beyond academic achievements?
Absolutely. I think, like I said, I think it's character and I think it's citizenship. And so many private schools, if the private schools are faith based, there's going to be a faith element to what you want your student outcomes to be. I've seen a lot of schools, they've written what a portrait of a graduate is supposed to look like.
Mhm.
And so, what you want students to exemplify by the time they graduate. I think when you're articulating your school culture and your mission, your values, your beliefs, those are going to hopefully be embedded within everything you do and thus embedded within the hearts and within the behaviors of your students. Beyond academic achievement, I would think it would be measures by work ethic, by service, and going back to the colleges and universities that I attended.
Mm.
St. Anselm College is Benedictine, and you'll hear a lot throughout your time at St. Anselm, faith seeking understanding, which is a hallmark of St. Anselm and the Benedictine order which runs it. At Notre Dame, you'll hear a lot about making God known, loved, and served, which is a quote from Father Basil Moreau, the founder of the Congregation of Holy Cross. Or you'll hear quoted quite a bit from the founder of Notre Dame, Father Edward Sorin, that Notre Dame is to be the greatest source for doing good. So a service minded graduate, a service minded, not just what am I learning, but then how can I take what I learn and use it in service to others.
Mhm.
So I think when you're thinking about private and Catholic schools, you're thinking about your mission. And then are you going to have mission centric people? It doesn't have to be the exact mission of the institution they attended, but then what have they evaluated? What's their personal mission? And then how can they use what they've gained to be of service to others?
Yes, definitely. And one that is commonly used, God, country, Notre Dame. It's that your faith is first, your service to your country, to your neighbors, to those in your community, and then Notre Dame or the institution of Notre Dame. But what that represents for me is service to others, is love, is acceptance, is inclusivity. That comes full circle for me. Matt, in your capacity as Vice President of Educational Partnerships, what approaches have you taken to encourage innovation and forward thinking within private school environments?
I would encourage all private school leaders and teachers for that matter to have an entrepreneurial spirit when they're thinking about their schools. And what I mean by that is, it's a little cliche of think outside the box. Think how you think. You don't have to think outside the box or the
Right.
proverbial box, but it's don't be afraid of change.
Mhm.
I think sometimes private schools, Catholic schools can sometimes get stuck in that this is a tradition. This is how we've done things. This is the way it operates. And sometimes it's great to have that level of consistency,
Mhm.
but sometimes, but more important than that is being reflective and evaluative of how we can get better.
Mhm.
And so sometimes those ways that we get better is by changing. And so I would just really think about that entrepreneurial spirit, whether that be being creative with the way you structure tuition or have things done in that respect. It
Mhm.
doesn't always have to be that, oh, we do re-enrollment at this time, we do registration fees, etc. I've
Right.
seen schools be really innovative in terms of having um, what they call an evergreen contract at their schools. So rather than having families have to re-enroll and do the work to sign up for the next year, the school says your child is automatically re-enrolled next year.
That's awesome.
there is a 3-week window where you can let us know if you're deciding to go to another school. So now you've taken the burden away from the parents
Yes.
of having to sign up,
Mm-hmm.
and you're a little bit more like Amazon, and your subscription to Prime is automatically renewing unless you tell me you don't want to.
Right.
That's one way. Um, Other ways is embracing technology for what it can do for you.
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes teachers will struggle with, I don't want to post everything on Google Classroom or whatever the learning management system is for the school, because the students need to learn responsibility for their assignments and their due dates and everything. And that's great. And they do need to learn that responsibility. But how does that responsibility look in 2023
Right.
versus how did it look 10 years ago? Because for me, I have my iPhone that pings and reminds me every time I have an appointment or have a meeting and whatnot. I don't have to self manage as much because I have tools that help me do that. And that doesn't make me any lesser of an employee. It actually keeps me accountable and make sure. So asking ourselves, what's the goal? So whether that be in the classroom or as the school, what's the goal? What do I want our outcome to be? And how do we remove obstacles and barriers from gaining that outcome? Now, sometimes the obstacles are part of achieving the outcome. You need to persevere through challenges, and you need to have an element of struggle or failure in order to learn. I'm not saying to pave a smooth path for everyone or for our students when it's not necessary, but that constant reflection on how we can improve, and again, that entrepreneurial spirit, so that you can be, as from in a leadership standpoint, marketable
Mm-hmm.
to the students and families you want to gain. And then from the teacher standpoint of, how am I building students and building skills and resourcefulness in my students? Because that resourcefulness and problem solving, critical thinking is more what is going to carry them year over year. Because as we're teaching kids that are going to have jobs that don't exist yet,
Right.
what are those transferable universal skills
Right.
of problem solving, critical thinking that's going to serve them, analytical skills that is going to be really beneficial to them, regardless of what path they take in life?
This is such a great point that you bring up, because we have to be relevant to make sure that we are educating these kids for a future, but for their future, not where we are currently with our technology. And yes, technology has its pitfalls. It definitely is a very strong, powerful tool that needs to be regulated. But the skills that you build while learning about technology are needed to be relevant. So really, it is important to understand how to use it as a tool, not just, it's not a babysitting mechanism. And so there are some people that are on are on opposite sides of the spectrum. Everything has to be technology, then they are losing out on some of these foundational skills. And then people who are just so adverse to technology that the kids are not getting what they need to really have their lessons be applicable within their own lives outside of the classroom.
Abs- Absolutely. It's absolutely a balance. And the other thing is, like you said, it's a tool, and we need to teach them how to use the tool responsibly and properly. Because if we don't, then they're going to learn how to use the tool, or they're going to use the tool how they see peers use it, or
Right.
how they see influencers use it, or whomever else. And it's like anything else. If we give them a good example,
Hmm.
parameters and guidance and mentorship in how to use these things, anything out there, whether it be technology or anything else, can be used for good, or it can be used for detriment of others. And if we have to embrace what's there, not be scared of it, embrace it to a level that we're comfortable with, but in teaching the students responsibility, care, and how to be good with it.
Right. 100%.
And I think, as we talk about technology, I think one thing that STEM education has become such a big focus throughout the educational landscape. The concept behind STEM is that we're integrating the learning, and we're not learning in silos. We're not learning just math and then just science, and then just English, and then just
Right.
you name the subject. It's everything integrates and works together
Hmm.
just like our lives do.
Right.
We have to use the skills that we developed in our English classes to write our science report. And we have to use our math skills to analyze the data in science, et cetera. All of those things. The more teachers can provide an integrated curriculum for their students, the more they'll see how their learning applies to their life, and developing that sense of truth and beauty
Hmm.
in them and the love of learning will just continue to flourish.
Yes. I could not agree more.
I was just talking to actually someone who I think will be a good podcast guest, essentially. His name is Mike McShane.
Hmm.
So he got his PhD at the University of Arkansas and in educational policy or something like that. He's a super dynamic speaker, but he's done so much in terms of school choice, authored a book on alternative schools and stuff like
Hmm.
that and whatnot. And he said, we're having to pivot a little bit right now because for so long we've been talking school choice in terms of changing people's hearts, changing people's attitudes and stuff like that. And he goes, and it feels like all of a sudden the floodgates are opening and like all these states are on board. So now we're focusing less on our thought of legislature and now it policy and implementation. So I think of it in the same way as school culture. Like you've got to focus on that mission, getting people's mindset correctly, getting there and getting the right people on your team. Then you're going to hit a turning point where you've reached the peak and then you're going to have momentum taking you as opposed to a constant uphill climb. There is a peak there where you're going to get over the top, get over the hump, see the horizon, and then there's going to be momentum that helps carry you.
And just we as people want to be part of things that make us feel good and happy. And when you have this environment that's not toxic, that's truly supportive, that having that culture, it makes people want to be part of what you're doing.
They should be able to develop a culture, a working environment for their teachers where it's a place you want to come to work every day, you feel supported. There's that balance of, yes, we have expectations, but you have autonomy on how to do your
Right.
job because I think that gives a lot of fulfillment.
Thank you, Matt, for all of your thoughts and for your suggestions for different resources and ways to start looking at your school culture. So, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to be with us.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Appreciate being a part of the ADAC team and part of ADAC Answers.
Perfect. Thank you.